Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm continuing with my short series on Undaunted Normandy, and I've set up a scenario where the Germans, represented down here in the southern section of the map, are going to attempt a short and small counter-offensive across a canal against the shoreline that's tenuously held by US forces who are grouped over there. So just to give you a quick view of the starting situation, the Germans have two groups of riflemen and two groups of scouts. They have conducted reconnaissance of the areas immediately surrounding them, including an area that's worth a victory point to both sides, depending on who holds it. The winner in this scenario is the first side to attain 6 victory points. So the Germans really just need to try to seize the banks of the canal. The Americans, for their part, can win by consolidating the areas to the north, or if they want to make more of a fight of it, they can contest the canal. Both options are risky, of course. Colliding with the Germans, they have an equal force, so depending on how the battle goes, it could be 50-50. Failing that, if they try for simply consolidating the positions immediately adjacent to themselves, there is a slight element of risk because it then becomes a bit of a race against time. So we have evenly matched forces, and they are both going to attempt to either take or hold this position here. So what happens first in this game is both sides shuffle their starting deck. Now you'll notice that there are cards off to either side of the map, the Americans there, the Germans there. Those are your supply cards. They do not begin accessible to you except by card play, and certain cards, particularly squad leaders, allow you to take cards from your supply and add them to your deck of cards. So they increase your options and they increase the size of your squad, but they can also make it a little bit unwieldy. This mechanic will be familiar to players who are fond of deck building games. There are also, of course, the dreaded fog of war cards, whose only function is really to take up space in your hand. These represent the confused nature of the fighting, loss of situational awareness, anything that might cause you to be indecisive or simply not be able to take action due to insufficient information. So each side draws 4 cards. The Germans start with the initiative, but each turn involves a bidding phase where both sides can bid. So the Germans will have to try and retain the initiative if they want to. The US, I think, would probably want to try and seize it off them. So we'll see how that goes. Once both players have drawn their starting hands, they look at what they've got and they select one card to bid secretly to rest the initiative, and that's the initiative rating of each card. You can see the United States starting hand has a fog of war card, a rifleman card affecting Squad B, a squad leader card for Squad A, and a scout card for Squad A. Now the squad leader is quite a useful card, but the US player would really like to have the initiative this turn rather. So he secretly places that card face down by the side of the map. While he's doing this, the German player would be similarly looking at his cards. Now, unfortunately for him, he's got 2 fog of war cards, so it's not a brilliant start. However, he does have a scout card for his Squad B, and he has the very useful platoon sergeant card, and this is the senior officer in the game. You can see his rating is 9. The German player, like the American player, knowing the huge importance of the first turn of the game, would really like to have the initiative, so he secretly bids this card. Once both players have bid, the totals are compared. Obviously the German wins, so the Germans retain the initiative, and the cards are placed in a discard pile next to the draw deck. And now play can go to the turn. So looking at his remaining cards, with each card in your hand, except for the Fog of War cards, you can either play the card for one of its actions, or you can do what's called hunkering down, which is to return the card to your supply. That's quite useful if for whatever reason you want to place a card out of play. It means you can't use it for a while until you bring it back into play, but it also means it's relatively safe from enemy action. There's no way they can touch a soldier who's hunkering down. Of course, the German player's options, unfortunately, are quite limited on turn 1. So he is going to use the scout card. He has no other choice, really. He's going to do something with it. Now, scouts are extremely useful. Their primary ability is to move 2 spaces and scout. Scouting allows the rest of your force to advance. The German forces in this sector, aside from the scouts, cannot advance into unscouted terrain. A scout has to dash through and highlight what's there for them. So at the moment, if he had a rifleman card, he could have advanced a rifleman counter there or there, but not there or there. So in order to remedy this, he's going to play the scout card, activating its scout ability. That goes in the discard pile. And that was the scout from squad B is going to move 1 and 2. As the scout moves through those areas, they are scouted, so the German can place these binocular tokens. So what the scout has done is to open up new avenues of advance for the rest of the force. Unfortunately, this does come at a price. For each new area you scout, your growing uncertainty also builds, so the Germans have to add 2 Fog of War cards from their supply space to their play deck. So I'll just stick those on there now and then give it a little shuffle. So it's pros and cons with your scouting. You gain the opportunity to advance into tactically vital spaces, but your sense of uncertainty about the overall situation builds at the same time. A bit counterintuitive, but there we go. Once the German player has played all the cards he can, the Fog of War cards, which really are just placeholders, go into the discard pile. And that is the end of the German player's turn. The US player, who's been looking on horrified at this, looks at his 2 remaining cards, so he can activate the scout for squad A and the rifle section for squad B. Now, the good thing is your squad integrity doesn't matter in this game. Either your scouts from squad A or squad B can do the scouting, and the rest of the units of your nationality can benefit from that. So thank goodness that's actually fairly useful. He decides to activate the scout first, but he's not going to move him 2 spaces, partly because there's enemy occupation over there already, but he wants Scout A to move here, just the 1 space, and scout out that rather vital farmhouse, which is worth 2 victory points. So the scout duly does so. The US player has to add a Fog of War card to his deck. And he still has to consider what he'd like to do with his rifleman card. Now, he already controls that area worth 2 victory points, so he's a bit ahead of the Germans at this point. The most logical decision is to consolidate his hold on that valuable bit of real estate he's just scouted. So looking at the options on the rifleman's card, he can either move, try to attack at very long range, but at that distance you're not going to hit anything. Control allows riflemen to seize control of an area. Now, your infantry are all important because riflemen are the only people who can take control of an area. You take control of a space by playing the action, and you can flip your scouted marker to a control marker. If you've managed to take an empty space with an enemy control marker, you similarly use that instruction to degrade their control and eventually establish your own. So at the moment, though, Rifleman Section B can only move. So the American player will order the rifleman in to the sector in the hope of establishing control next turn. Finally, he gets rid of his Fog of War card. And that's it. That's a single game turn. Play will proceed on and on until one side or another successfully captures an objective. I'm just going to play another turn just to show you how the situation develops, but really that is one single turn in a nutshell. It's a very simple game, and we just go on and on until one side achieves victory, but I won't make you sit through that whole lot. So the two players will draw their 4 cards from their deck. 2 hypothetical players, I should say. I seem to spend a lot of time talking to myself over the game boards when I'm doing these. And now we get back to initiative. The United States player really wants the initiative. Really wants it. And he doesn't have that great a mix of cards for carrying out actions this turn. So what he's going to do is he's going to bid his platoon sergeant, who's worth 9. The Germans, looking at their hand and unaware that he's doing this, but they would still like to retain the initiative. So they are going to risk using their scout. They don't really want to do that much more scouting just yet. So they will play the scout, who's worth 6. Of course, much to their disappointment, when the cards are revealed, the US player will have the initiative. So the initiative counter flips to the US side, and the US player takes his turn first. Now, as I say, his options are horrible. He can either bolster, which means he can add 2 cards from the supply to his draw deck, and that's specific to Squad B, because this is the leader for Squad B. Or he can inspire. Inspire allows him to take an already played Squad B card and put it back in his hand and use it again. Now, that only applies to cards that have been played in the action phase, so really the only thing the US player can do at the moment is bolster. So looking at his available forces for Squad B, he decides he's going to go for a bit of... He's not ready for mass firepower yet, but he would like a bit more support, so he gets a scout and he gets a rifleman and shuffles them into his draw deck. Oh wait, no he doesn't. I lie, that is not what happens. They get placed in the discard pile first and are later on shuffled into the draw deck. My bad, sorry about that. And finally, the 2 Fog of War cards, which he can't use, are placed in the discard pile too. Moving on to the Germans, they have a rifleman card. They've been unlucky again with Fog of War cards, but they can activate one of their riflemen. And they are going to send him here, or at least send the group there. So the riflemen advance into that position. Now the reason for doing that is worth 3 victory points, the vital location with the bridge. The rest are important, but they're only worth 1 victory point. If the Germans can activate the other scout on the next turn, they can scout that location and the rifleman will be in a very good position to move in and seize it. But unfortunately for them, that is all they can do this turn. And that's it. That is the end of turn 2. Now, so far no combat has taken place, so I'll just demonstrate a random bit of combat to you. Let us say that it is turn 3, and the riflemen there decide that they would like to fire at the German scouts over there. I'll just bring us a bit closer to the scene of the action. Combat is extremely simple in this game. To activate a unit to fire, again let's use the example of the rifleman, you play the appropriate card, trigger their attack ability. Attack 1 means that they can make a single dice roll. So the card is played, it would be put in the discard pile in this instance, and the rifleman works out the number he needs to hit. Now the 5 in the shield there, that is the base number you need to score in order to hit the unit. And you have a choice. Some units can go for suppressive fire, others just go for damaging fire, hits that inflict casualties. Riflemen can't conduct suppressive fire, unlike machine guns, so they are just going to shoot. The distance to the target, including the space they're in, is added to the target number, so that now becomes 6. And any terrain defense modifiers are added too. Now that's a 0 because there's no cover there, so the Americans have to roll a 6 or more to damage the German unit. They make their roll, and it is a 7, which is a hit. So in terms of working out the damage, the German player first has to look in his hand to see whether he has an appropriate scout card for that unit, a scout from section B. If he does, that card is placed out of the game. It's gone for good. If he doesn't have one in his hand, he then has to check his discard pile to find one. If he does not have one in there, he then has to look through his draw deck, reshuffling it afterwards. And if there is no appropriate card there, then the unit is considered destroyed and is temporarily removed. Now on a future turn, it's entirely possible that the German could find a way of getting any cards from any scout cards from this group back into his deck from his supply pile. If that is the case, he can then play the card, and what will happen is the counter will return to the German rally point. That token that says all on it indicates that all German reinforcements arrive in that location, nowhere else. And the same is true for the US forces. So that is how combat works in this game. And that really is all you need to know to play Undaunted. Simple, isn't it? Remarkably